You put on a good show, but I don't buy it.
I don't understand.
You're no Jedi. Just some overconfident Imperial trash who just pushed their luck too far.
You're making a mistake.
And you, sir, should have surrendered when the Empire collapsed. Jakris, get RD3 to scan these imposters for identification.
Allow me to show you our identification. You're right about one thing, Captain. We are no Jedi.
Oh, greetings, Bucketheads. Mavar Tigar. Welcome to our 213th astonishingly Ahsoka episode of Mandovision. Nargai Tom, and thank you so much for checking out this small independent Star Wars podcast. We're so glad you're here, and we're so glad to be back. Remember, the best way to reach out to us is on social media at Mando_Vision on Twitter and Instagram. We're still on Twitter. We don't know if that'll last forever, but for now we are. But definitely find us on Instagram. My goodness. Please email the show at mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast with all the Mandalorians in your covert. Well, it's here. It's finally dropped. It's happened. The Ahsoka series that we've been waiting so long for is finally upon us. And more importantly, this show is back to talk about it. So I'm delighted. You all may recall from the little bonus show that we dropped a few weeks back, there have been some scheduling conflicts over the course of the summertime that have precluded me from making a lot of new episodes of the series. Luckily, we had some banked, so we were able to stay fairly consistent throughout these summer months. But now we're here. We're back with new shows. My first time back in front of the microphone, really getting to talk to everybody in quite some time. So hopefully I'm not too rusty. And I'm really excited for what we're here to talk about. To talk about the Ahsoka show that we've all been looking forward to for quite some time. And it's now finally here. August is upon us. And I just, like many of you, I couldn't be more excited. We've been doing a great job, I think, kind of chronicling a lot of Ahsoka's rise through the Jedi Order as in our Star Wars Clone Wars rewatch episodes. And we just dropped the end of Season 5 not too long ago. And those are absolutely pivotal episodes for the development of the character. So it's seemed like a good place to kind of wait for the Ahsoka show to stop, to get started, so we can kind of touch on some of those elements, right? Now, obviously, the series has a lot of connections to the Rebel series, which we've not done a rewatch on just yet. So, we'll talk about a lot of that stuff as we go on, but the assumption is going to be that everyone's watched Rebels. So we're just going to talk about Rebels without having to lay a lot of the groundwork. And that is an interesting challenge that I think this show has. Specifically after watching these first two episodes, I was sort of surprised by how strong the connections were to Rebels. They make an effort to sort of lay it out there for new fans to be able to walk into the show. I'm not sure how successful those efforts are necessarily, because I feel like there's the storytelling, the connections to the characters are very dense and complex. and they're trying to get a lot of information out to new audience members without having to kind of give us that entire history. And I suppose what they're going for is like, well, yeah, there's history here, and if you really want to know more about it, you should go back and watch Rebels, but you kind of don't because we're just going to move forward anyways. And there's enough new stuff there for even us hardcore Star Wars fans to sort of wonder about, like, hey, wait, what has happened since the end of Rebels? Because there seems to be a lot of implication of things having occurred that we're sort of in the dark about, and we'll get a chance to talk about those things a little bit more fully on the other side of the bump. But let's go ahead and get our particulars out for this the first two parts of the series that dropped last night, which will mean that we break these episodes down a little bit differently than we normally would when we tackle them one-on-one. But let's go ahead and talk about the plot for Part 1, Master and Apprentice. A valuable prisoner escapes New Republic custody. A search for answers reunites old friends. This episode, written and directed by Dave Filoni, the Master and Apprentice relationship at work in that episode. In regards to the title for this context, we'll say George Lucas is the Master, Dave Filoni is the Apprentice, and now Dave Filoni sort of is rising up to become a master in his own right. And I think he pays a wonderful homage to Lucas's style for visual storytelling in this episode. So kind of take note of that when you watch the episode. It's very, very interesting. Part 2 is Toil and Trouble. Plot for that episode: Ahsoka and General Hera Syndulla travel to New Republic shipyards and make an unexpected discovery. This episode has connections to the recently concluded Season 3 of The Mandalorian, specifically Episode 3, The Convert. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the other side of the bump as well. This episode, written by Dave Filoni, directed by Steph Green, who directed at least one episode of the Book of Boba Fett, has also directed The Americans, the Watchmen series that was on HBO, so a very accomplished director in their right. Our primary cast for these two episodes: Rosario Dawson, Natasha Liu Bordizzo, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Ray Stevenson, the late great Ray Stevenson. I believe this will be his final on-screen appearance in anything since his passing a few months ago. So they did a lovely tribute to Ray at I believe it was at the end of the episode. So really nice to see him in live action for Star Wars. He's done voice work in the past, but again, seeing him on the screen, he brings a real presence to things, and we'll talk a little bit about that too as we get into the episode. Also starring Ivana Sacno, Diana Lee Inosanto, David Tennant. Clancy Brown makes the jump from animation to live action Star Wars without having to have a ton of makeup on. And Iman Esfandi has a small little cameo as Ezra Bridger. So that's really exciting stuff. I think it's time to dive into the episode. There's a lot going on. We talked a little bit already about how complex and dense some of the storytelling elements are in the series. So we got a lot to kind of tackle here as we move forward. So we're going to do that, which you know what that means. It's time. Strap on your buckets. Let's go.
Balin, you are true to your word.
And well paid for it, Lady Morgan.
The Jedi who captured me seeks the map. She knows about Thrawn.
Who is this Jedi?
Ahsoka Tano.
So I'm very, very, very excited that this series is on now. We get a new taste of the Star Wars, this New Republic era that they've begun exploring through The Mandalorian, and also that it's acting as something of a sequel to Rebels, which is an absolutely phenomenal Star Wars series, if you've not watched it, which I just assume we all have. But as is sort of a known kind of commodity, there's a few adjustments, a few tweaks to things that I think are very, very interesting thus far on the series. I did really like these first two episodes, so please note that anything that I sort of comment on and maybe appear to be critical of is not in a negative fashion. It is positive. I do like this show a lot. I did think Part 1 sort of had some interesting pacing. It was slower in spots than I would have expected, but I think part of that may just be because with a series like The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, they move at this insanely lightning pace. That sounded like a bad sentence, but the pace on those series is incredibly quick, very brisk, and sometimes it's like so fast you're sort of like caught off guard. You're like, wait, what just happened? The show's over. This show is more deliberate, more drawn out, more thoughtful in a lot of senses. But I think us Star Wars fans maybe have gotten a little used to that faster tempo on things. So there may be moments, particularly in the first episode, that seem like they're a little drawn out. Like particularly the one I'll reference here is Ahsoka in that chamber, kind of putting that puzzle together so that she can unlock that map room and get the sphere. That was really a drawn out sequence. It was very interesting. I mean, it obviously has a bit of an homage to Indiana Jones stuff, but I was surprised by how long it was and how kind of drawn out it was. An interesting sequence to say the least. And that's sort of our first glance at first visuals of Ahsoka in the series is on that planet, in that map room. We find out that she's, working with Huang. They have a ship. They do things together. They go on adventures. Who knew? I'm very curious. I'm curious how Ahsoka and Huang came to be in partnership and connection with each other after everything. Huang was one of those characters that we don't know what their ultimate fate was after Order 66. So to see him back with Ahsoka was cool, but I have questions. But Star Wars likes to leave us kind of with blanks, right? They like to kind of keep us guessing and wondering, and it leaves them more wiggle room for stories down the road, I suppose. But maybe we'll find out more as the series plays out about how they kind of came into contact with one another again after all this time away. But it's a neat sequence. We get to see a bunch of HK droids. That's always fun. Good combat stuff with Ahsoka. Always great to see the lightsaber action. And it was a very fast-paced lightsaber battle with those HK droids, which I really caught my eye. I want to go back a little bit to our initial introduction to Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati. And I was really impressed with that. I mean, we saw a little bit of it from the trailers, but to kind of see the way they spring into action, begin to get a taste of sort of what their master and apprentice relationship is like. It's a little bit different than I expected. Baylan Skoll is very much not the character I thought he would be. We know he's not a Jedi. We're bandying about the terminology Dark Jedi, Fallen Jedi. Clearly not a Sith necessarily, at least not in the sense that we think he may be. But he sort of has this. He sort of has the demeanor of a Jedi still, right? And he sort of has a bit of a nostalgia for the Jedi. We see a little bit of that, a little taste of that in the second episode, in part 2. So I think Baylan is going to be an interesting character to kind of get to know more about. Now, clearly he talks about, in that second episode, that they're going to get power. But what kind of power is Baylan Skoll looking for is sort of the question that I'm drawn to. I'm very curious. I love the way they sort of track down his identity. They have that video from when they free Morgan Elsbeth, and Huang is able to analyze the lightsaber. I thought that was neat because that's Huang's whole thing, right? Is lightsaber construction. That's his skill set. So for Huang to have those archival records of everyone's lightsaber hilts was very, very cool. And then very, very cool in the other sense that clearly Shin Hati is new, is someone that Baylan Skoll has recruited himself and taught to construct a lightsaber on his own using Huang's methods. So she's on the record in the database and is something of an unknown. I'm very curious if we get to see how Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati came to be master and apprentice. I'd love to see that. And then there's the third member of this sort of dark Jedi, fallen Jedi triumvirate, which is Maruk, the Inquisitor that we've seen around in trailers, and many people have guessed at their identity. And I can say that I've read those articles. Me, I don't do a lot of the speculation stuff. I don't do a lot of those wild guessing games. But my assumption, my theory at this point is that Maruk is Baylan Skoll's first apprentice. That was I would imagine corrupted by possibly Darth Vader himself and thrown into the Inquisitors. And then at some point Baylan Skoll was able to not liberate but sort of bring back from the precipice of the dark side. And now, but for some reason, as a penance, still wears that Inquisitor's uniform, still wears that uses that Inquisitor's lightsaber. I'm curious to see if that's how it shakes out. We'll find out. But again, that's my guess right now, is that Maruk is the first apprentice of Baylan Skoll, and Skoll has sort of put together this sort of family unit of fallen Jedi, right? People who probably had some sort of fallout from Order 66, like Shin Hati. There may be a connection there to the Jedi that we are unaware of thus far, that brought her to Skoll, or Skoll to her initially. But yeah, it almost seems like there's a bit of a loose family structure there, at least as much as a Jedi can get away with, being that Baylan Skoll was probably brought up as a Jedi from a very young age and doesn't have those sort of familial attachments. But it seems this time around maybe he's going about things a little bit differently, because I suspect, much like Ahsoka has throughout her tenure here, at some point comes into a disagreement with the philosophies of the Jedi. Now again, I am speculating wildly, but thus far, from what we've seen of Baylan Skoll through these 2 episodes, what we've seen of Shin Hati through these 2 episodes, and even the glimpses of Maruk that we've gotten, I'm very, very interested in their backstory, in their connections with each other. I hope we get to see that play out over the remaining 6 episodes of the season. I'd really like to explore that more fully. But this is a show that has a lot going on, so I would not be surprised if there are times when we don't get all the answers that we want. And maybe that's because there'll be a part 2 at some point. Though, obviously the passing of Ray Stevens probably precludes him from coming back. So Baylan Skoll's fate is probably determined at some point in this series. Though that all does remain to be seen at this point. Another interesting character in this that we learn much more about than when we first met them in Season 2 of The Mandalorian is Morgan Elsbeth. In this episode, we know she's an Imperial sympathizer, has strong ties to the Empire. Apparently, she's big into manufacturing, engine systems specifically for Star Destroyers, which is, that was sort of what was known, right? That she had very strong connections to the Empire. This was some kind of, we'll just say Imperial, right? We keep it simple at that, and that she has a connection to Thrawn. We still don't know what that connection to Thrawn is, but now they've added, and you notice it more with, I think you get kind of clued in here. You notice Morgan Elsbeth's hair is a bit different visually than it was when we first met her in Season 2 of The Mandalorian. And that's because I think they're trying to draw and emphasize that connection that is established in these episodes, that she is, in fact, a Night Sister. One of the surviving Night Sisters after the big purge of all the Night Sisters, right? So a very interesting new twist, new layer added to Morgan Elsbeth already, which I'm very intrigued to see how they follow it up, and more intrigued that a character connected to the Night Sisters would go and become an Imperial. Now, my suspicion is that it has to do with Thrawn. That Thrawn possibly recruited them into this. And that's why they maybe overlooked the fact that the Republic / the Separatists / the Empire, which, is all kind of one big thing at the end, led to the Night Sisters' demise, ultimately. So maybe Thrawn was rather persuasive in what he needed from Morgan Elsbeth, and got a bit of a follower in her in that regard. Again, we'll have to find out. We'll have to learn what these connections are. I'm sort of taking some guesses in the dark, but I'm her talking again, and this is in part 2, that Thrawn's trying to reach out to her, communicate with her. It's all very, very interesting stuff. Let's also go ahead and talk about what we're doing, what we're after in these first couple of episodes. We find out, you heard the sound clip right there, that Ahsoka is in search of the map that they need to track down Grand Admiral Thrawn. And I thought that was an interesting element, because Star Wars has become very fascinated with maps recently. We saw it in Rise of Skywalker. We saw it in The Force Awakens. Now we have a new map to track down in Ahsoka. Though what I do think is interesting about this map, and is sort of like one of the more galaxy-shaking revelations in this series so far, is that not only are they looking for a map that will lead to Grand Admiral Thrawn and hopefully to Ezra Bridger, but it is a map that it appears to have tracked the migratory patterns of the Purrgil, right? Which is very, very interesting. Which also leads to the question is like, did the Night Sisters track the migratory patterns of the Purrgil, or was it this other species that they referenced that are from another galaxy that came to oh gosh, I wish I'd written the name of that planet down. Where Skull and Elsbeth had put the sphere once they recovered it, to place it. So it tracks the migratory patterns of the Purrgil to another galaxy, which is the first time Star Wars has talked about galaxies beyond their own. So this is a very, very interesting revelation in the notion that we could possibly take our characters to another galaxy within the Star Wars universe. So that's a very interesting notion, and we'll see. I would imagine we will get to that other galaxy at some point because we know that Thrawn will be in the show. I would imagine Ezra Bridger will also be in the show. So yeah, we're going to travel to another galaxy in the Star Wars universe. So that's a pretty big deal right there. That's a pretty big piece of information that they give us. But yeah, I'm sort of surprised. I'm surprised. I'm surprised by that, but I'm also curious. Were the Night Sisters interested in the migratory patterns of the Purrgil, or was it this other species that came from the other galaxy via methods of the Purrgil, that probably provided by the Purrgil? Again, the rumor, the legends around the Purrgil is that in the Star Wars galaxy that we know, hyperspace travel was developed by observing the Purrgil and their methods of racing across the galaxy. That's legend. We don't know that for fact, but that's sort of like one of the stories bandied about in Star Wars lore at the moment. So kind of some big deal stuff going on in this episode. So we're after a map. The bad guys ultimately get the map, and we learn more about it. And Morgan Elsbeth, using her Night Sister powers, is able to activate it in a way that is a very cool visual. Do not misunderstand me there at all. That is a pretty awesome looking visual when she makes that sort of sphere around herself, Baylan Skoll, and Shin Hati. It's very, very neat. Great visuals, and I sort of love the way she delivers that backstory there. And again, you guys have probably all watched those closing credits, which is very, very cool too, kind of playing along the lines of those maps, that star map that they're after. Yeah, cool visuals on that closing credit, by the way. But again, I did sort of find it interesting that we were focusing on maps once again in Star Wars. So some neat stuff. Since we are talking about a lot of stuff in episode 2 right now, I will mention how much I enjoyed it. Hera Syndulla, Ahsoka Tano going to Corellia, going to the shipyards. We get to see Corellia in the light of day now, looking a little bit more pleasant than when we visited it in live action in Solo. But we find out that the Imperial presence is still a big deal. Just because the New Republic's calling it a shot doesn't mean people have forgotten who the Empire is. Again, so it sort of connects back to Season 3 of The Mandalorian in the covert episode. There are a lot of sort of sleeper agents in and amongst the New Republic, sort of showing that fragility of the New Republic, how sort of that new government, that new bureaucracy in place, not as good as they might think it is, as people are still loyal to the Empire. Now, Ahsoka says it's not loyalty, it's greed. But I don't know, man. I don't know a lot of people want to die for money, but the people will die for what they believe in. That's a fact. So I'm very, very curious. I'm also curious if these people are they loyal to Morgan Elsbeth in particular, and by extension Thrawn. Is that what they're waiting for? Is that what they know they're doing? They're all working towards the goal of bringing Thrawn back, not just, again, as we thought at the end of Rebels. It's not the unknown regions. It's another galaxy. So that's where we're really stretching things and getting kind of crazy. I sort of skipped over that when we were talking about the map earlier. I apologize. I did want to mention that, again, we just assumed they rocketed towards the unknown regions. No. Whole new galaxy. Which, again, still just blows my mind. But yeah, I have a lot of questions about the state of the New Republic and people who work for it. I don't trust any of them now anymore. I don't know why anybody else should either. But that whole sequence was great. I loved Hera rocketing off after the ship while Ahsoka stays on the surface to engage in lightsaber combat against an HK droid and Maruk. Fun sequence there. Love seeing Hera and Chopper in action again on the Phantom. Very, very cool. I was going to say this and get into it a little bit later, but yeah, we will. We'll go back and kind of focus on our heroes here in the next bit. I did like the pacing more in episode 2 than I did in episode 1. Thought I moved quicker. We got to the point on things. We got a lot of information really, really quickly. But again, that's sort of what I expected to happen. Episode 1 had to be sort of table setting, right? You had to bring your new audience in and kind of get them up to speed on the characters, their connections, the fact that they do have a history, even though we're not going to fully explore it in the depths with which we could. But again, the implication is go back and just watch Rebels, and you'll get to see a lot of this stuff. So yes, we end up in a very, very peculiar, a tough spot for our heroes at the end of episode 2, but it spurs the action forward, so gets our show off to a really strong start. So I'm really glad they put these 2 episodes out together, because again, you had that first episode that's a lot of table setting and getting things ready to go, but then we got a lot of really great action stuff in the second sequence, or in the second episode even. I guess we'll go back now, because I don't know what else I want to say about episode 2, because we hit the big high water marks there, right? Like, that was all the big stuff. That's all the stuff that's of import to discuss. And let's go back a little bit and get to episode 1 and talking about the characters coming together. You know, you have Ahsoka, you have Hera Syndulla, you have Sabine Wren, all these characters with a strong connection to each other through the course of the Rebel series. But I think they may take an effort to simplify things for a new audience. You know, Hera Syndulla seems surprised by the revelation that Thrawn is not dead, that he's just out, exiled across the galaxy somewhere. And again, they think in the galaxy. Turns out it's another galaxy. So that's an interesting revelation on its own. And then the Ahsoka Sabine dynamic, again, sort of teased in the trailers, because at one point Sabine does refer to Ahsoka as her master, but now we find out that at one point they were master and apprentice in a more formal manner than just like some kind of, maybe what we might have interpreted as a cutting jab or something of that nature. No. Ahsoka and Sabine entered into a master and apprentice relationship, apparently for the purposes of training Sabine to be a Jedi, which is very new information to me, and I think to many of us. We've seen Sabine train with lightsabers in the past, most notably the Darksaber when she came into possession of that. Kanan Jarrus handled her lightsaber training for that role, but that was more explicitly to learn how to wield a lightsaber. Now, is that what this is mostly about? In this case, was that Sabine wanted to learn how to be a better lightsaber person? Or was this full-blown, like, Sabine has enough latent force ability that she could be trained as a Jedi? Huang makes reference to the fact that when it came to force abilities, Sabine's was very nascent, specifically compared to Ezra Bridger's. So I'm very curious if we get to explore this more fully, how this partnership, how this relationship came to be, how this apprenticeship came to be, and ultimately what brought it to its end. And I suspect we'll get there, so I don't want to speculate too much on that at the moment. But I would imagine we'll get to explore that ground there. Because, again, it seems like a lot has happened between Sabine and Ahsoka since we saw them at the end of Rebels. But we sort of recreate the end of Rebels, right? At the end of episode 2, when Sabine finally comes to be the version of her that we see at the end of the animated series of Rebels, before they take off looking for Thrawn and Bridger. So they sort of recreate that scene. It's a little different visually, but it's kind of a nice little moment that, like, hey, we're jumping off here. That little epilogue that we had in Rebels, this is it. And now we're jumping off into that new adventure that we promised. So that's kind of a cool element of things. I really, really did enjoy that a lot. I want to go back and talk about Sabine, because the show may be titled Ahsoka, but I think Sabine is sort of stealing the show, at least in these first 2 episodes, as her journey, as her the emotional weight that she carries with her for sort of being the survivor of the Spectres, right? In a sense. I mean, she's the one character who doesn't seem to have moved on. Ahsoka is doing her thing. Hera Syndulla is a general in the New Republic now. We've seen everyone in the Rebels crew kind of doing different things, having moved on. And she's the one person in place. She's on Lothal. She's hanging around, not doing much. Doesn't want to be part of these ceremonies that kind of remind her of what she must perceive as a failing, which is the disappearance of Ezra Bridger, the presumed death of Ezra Bridger. So she's been mired in that for quite some time. Now, as is a plot element that we could also apply to Ahsoka, you have to sort of wonder, well, after Rebels ended, like, what exactly did Sabine do in the intervening years? Obviously, she spent time with Ahsoka, but we all wonder, like, where was Ahsoka during the time of the original trilogy? What was she up to? Now, I guess it's possible that she and Sabine Wren were gallivanting across the galaxy as Master and Apprentice, doing different things on behalf of the rebellion, but we don't know for sure. There's a lot of wiggle room to tell some stories there and get into things. But for whatever reason, once Ahsoka and Sabine's partnership dissolved, Sabine simply went back to Lothal and sort of, I don't know, pined for Ezra in a way. Not necessarily romantically, because they had that weird hologram where Ezra calls her his sister, which is sort of contrary to the first couple seasons of this show, where I feel like Ezra very much wanted to have a romantic relationship with Sabine. But again, relationships grow and develop and change, right? So again, that'll have to be explored more fully later if you ever get to see Ezra in real life in this series. So the dynamics between this group of friends is very different than where we left it, and very interesting. So I'm waiting to see how that sort of shakes out, how much more information we get. But Sabine sort of steals the show, I think, in these first 2 episodes. Now, again, it was interesting to see her get stabbed, impaled on Shin Hati's lightsaber at the end of episode 1. But I think we all knew she wasn't going to go out like that. So it sort of was anticlimactic in that sense. But it gives us a chance to see that Shin Hati is pretty darn formidable, and that whatever lightsaber training Sabine Wren has, she has not kept up with, as she was very easily outmatched by Shin Hati when they recovered the sphere. And let's go back to that too. Let's talk a little bit, again, that Ahsoka-Sabine relationship, that master and apprentice relationship is a strained relationship. And so much so that Sabine has no regard for following instructions from Ahsoka. That's why she takes the sphere, leaves the ship, and ultimately the bad guys take it, because apparently she's acting out. She's rebellious. She's got issues with authority still. Is it specifically directed at Ahsoka, or is it like a sort of a general attitude because of the loss of Ezra and the things that have happened in the intervening years that we don't quite have all the answers to? I'm interested in that. I did really enjoy also Sabine's entrance in this episode. The speeder racing down the streets, the Lothal security forces trying to detain her and bring her back to the ceremony where she's supposed to be speaking in honor of Ezra. All that stuff was very, very cool. And again, the visuals on it were pretty awesome, showing Sabine as sort of the character that we know and love. And again, Sabine is, in many senses, Sabine's the most accurate character to what we saw in Rebels, right? So, like, not only are they standing still in their life, but they seem to be standing still in their growth as an individual in a lot of senses. Because Ahsoka and Hera are quite different than when we saw them last in Rebels. Now, part of that may be just sort of like the general leap from animation to live action. But Hera Syndulla, I don't want to say that Mary Elizabeth Winstead is a little flat as Hera, but Hera doesn't quite have like that swagger, doesn't quite have the little bit of bravado that she had as like this great pilot. And I wish we'd see a little bit more of that from the character. But again, a big chunk of time has passed. We're like 8-ish years removed from the end of Rebels, right? Somewhere around there, maybe 10. And Ahsoka seems to have become more stoic since our last full-time adventures with her. More centered, more. Well, instead of saying more, we'll just say less. She seems less emotional, and it's sort of one of the big differences that I see from Ahsoka in the animated series to what we've seen from Rosario in the live action so far. She was a little bit more approachable in her Mandalorian episodes, a little bit more of the sort of friendly, welcoming Ahsoka. This episode, she seems more Jedi-like in a sense, and I wonder if that has to do with the parallels they're drawing between the master and apprentice relationship, or has something occurred to make her be more Jedi-like once again? Is she harboring ideas of what the Jedi Order needs to be to come back, even though she seems to not? She seems to actively say she's not a Jedi still, and that she's not part of the Order, but she seems to act more like a Jedi than we have seen her in the past. And I always sort of harbored these ideas. And again, since The Mandalorian has come on in 2019 and reintroduced these characters and shown that Ahsoka is connected to Luke Skywalker, a lot of my old Ahsoka ideas have kind of been blown out of the water, which I'll reemphasize here for anyone who maybe has forgotten or is unaware. I always sort of thought that Ahsoka leaving the Order was the best thing for that character because not only did they see the failings of the institution, but they saw what was wrong with the institution, the ideologies that were flawed. And I thought, if anything, Ahsoka should start a new order or a new group of force-wielding heroes because she has seen the hypocrisy and the false, the wrongness of those ideologies that the Jedi had that led them so far astray, that led them to be blinded by the dark side. That Ahsoka would sort of be like this transcendent character who could either bring the Jedi back but in a different fashion, or again start a whole new order of Force users that go a different direction. But when we saw her in the Book of Boba Fett, sort of enabling Luke Skywalker to tread down this road that's been tread down many, many times without showing him the warning signs and learn from everything that she's experienced, sort of upset the apple cart I had made in my mind for the Ahsoka character. Like, if the Jedi Order is going to come back, I feel like she should give Luke a few warnings about things. But, what do I know? We haven't really explored the new Jedi Order very much yet, so we don't really know how many things Luke brought from the old school to the new school. So I guess that's something that we'll have to explore one day as well. But yeah, so Ahsoka's a little bit different than I would have expected her to be, and I don't blame. I do not fault Rosario. It's probably what's asked for in the scripts, in the material for the tone of the series. But it makes me miss Ashley Eckstein's a very emotional version of Ahsoka Tano. So maybe we'll get to see that at some point. Maybe as the characters kind of grow and reconnect with each other, Ahsoka will kind of take down her guard. Maybe let her defenses down a little bit, become more of that Ahsoka that we know and love so much. And again, not a knock on the character, because I'm digging the character on the show, but you have to notice those differences that are stark at times compared to where we last saw them. But again, remember, a lot of time has passed, but we haven't seen Ahsoka in this timeline. So just things I'm watching, things I'm taking note of, and generally, just kind of observing at this point in things. So I wanted to mention that going back to the map, the Purgo migration path. I did like that Baylan Skull referred to something called the Pathway of Peridia, a sort of a Jedi folklore that younglings tell each other about other galaxies. I sort of like that. That's sort of the connection that he makes when Morgan Elsbeth shows him that star map to another galaxy. I thought that was very fascinating. I'd love to hear more about that. So, again, 2 densely packed episodes, a lot of information in these episodes. I'm really looking forward to rewatching them over the weekend and sort of diving into them a little bit more fully. But they're great. There's good action in both episodes, a lot of storytelling in both episodes. Again, you're reconnecting characters in the first part, and you're introducing a bunch of new ones in part 1. So part 2, I think, really takes off when we're sort of ready to go. And now the way part 2 closes with that moment, sort of recreating the end of Rebels and telling us who are in the know that, hey, all right, we're launching forward 6 new episodes. This is the adventure we were promised all those years ago when Rebels came to an end. That's really exciting stuff. So I'm really delighted with that. I think the show has a lot of promise, a lot of potential, and I'm really liking where it's headed right now. It's always been the prerogative of this podcast to be the positive light on Star Wars shows, and we do comment when things seem a little out of alignment with the lore and the continuity and things like that. We'll point those things out, but this episode, this show, I'm less trepidatious about the show than I have been about Kenobi or about even Book of Boba Fett. This show, I think it's in good hands. I think Dave Filoni, having learned at the feet of the master George Lucas himself, has a very clear vision of what he wants this series to be and where he wants it to go. I don't think we're gonna get episodes that sort of like wander and meander. I think it is going to be concise. There's a lot of characters in the show. There's a lot of background information that they need to figure out how to get across to a new audience that doesn't watch the animated stuff. And then we have a ton of new characters that I want to get to explore fully too. So there's a lot on the plate for this series, and I really hope that we're able to get those answers, get that information that we want about the background. Particularly, like I'm completely fascinated by the bad guys so far. Morgan Elsbeth has a night sister. What? Okay, tell me more. Tell me how she survived. Was she on Dathomir when the Separatists attacked? I want to know these things. Baylan Skoll. Where was he at Order 66? What happened? Just tell me more. I want to know all those connections. They intrigue me. Shin Hati, I need to know more. Maruk, I need to know more. Let's get into it. And we haven't even gotten to the Thrawn of it all. We haven't even gotten to the Thrawn of it all yet. So I'm very intrigued. You guys may remember I've made a lot of references to the Heir to the Empire novels in the past, how much I love them, how much they set they rekindled my Star Wars passion in the early 90s. So to see something of a loose adaptation of it is very, very exciting to me. And I can't wait to see more Thrawn. Like, when do we get Thrawn? He's got to be coming. We know he's coming. We've seen him. Is Ezra coming? We want to see more Ezra. Let's do this. Let's make it happen. So big stuff coming up. New episodes every Tuesday. Again, not that they care. Not that they need me to acknowledge it, but big thanks to Disney for putting this out earlier on Tuesdays. It will enable this podcast, to chug along and very likely, hopefully, barring any unforeseen disasters, get episodes out on Wednesdays to cover the show. That new early release schedule is massively helpful to me. So thank you, Disney, for doing that. Should we give him buckets? I'm going to give the first episode, I'm going to give part one. I'm going to give part one like 8.5 buckets. I really liked it. Again, it's got some pacing issues. It's kind of slow, but I love seeing everyone reconnect, introducing these new characters. Loved it. Sabine getting stabbed. Sabine being broody and wistful. And then part two, where we up the ante. We start to see some action stuff. We get Chopper. We get to see the cracks in the New Republic, about how the Imperial Remnant seems to have infiltrated very strongly. But again, is it Imperial Remnant, or is it like Thrawn loyalists, Thrawn devotees? I want to know more. I give part two almost 9 buckets. 9. I think I'm going to give it a 9. Really liked it. Love that lightsaber combat against Maruk. Love the visuals of the star chart. Loved it. And I sort of loved Baylan Skoll kind of like waxing nostalgic for the Jedi Order. Very, very cool stuff. I can't wait to see more. I hope you all have watched the show, have enjoyed the show. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please hit me up. Let me know what you're thinking of the show. We'll get a friend on at some point to talk about this series, whether at the end or in the middle, to be determined. But I'm going to be reaching out, and you probably know who I'm reaching out to. He's probably listening right now, so his ears are percolating right now. They're perking up. He's talking about me. And so we'll be able to have a very lively discussion about Ahsoka at some point in the future here, and I'm really excited for it. So at this point, I do want to kind of wrap things up, all right? We'll be back every Wednesday, if everything goes according to plan. And I can't wait to have you guys here for the ride on the Ahsoka series. As the episodes shift into more singular format, one episode at a time, we'll be able to kind of dive into each episode a little bit more fully and kind of pull apart each of the layers that they present to us. I'm really looking forward to breaking them down in that fashion again. 2 episodes is just a lot to kind of dive into as one person. So I hope this has been okay for you. I hope you're entertained by my ideas and my notions. And hey, check us out on social media. We're still on Twitter. We don't know for how long, but we're definitely on Instagram. So find us over at Mando_Vision. You can email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. And hey, if you're liking the show, give us those sweet 5-star reviews. They are so very, very helpful for small independent Star Wars shows like us. They help us stand out, not get lost in the shuffle, and get new ears to listen to the show. So again, I hope you're liking the show. I hope you're liking this podcast and the Ahsoka series. So we'll get out of here for now. We'll be back next week. It's going to be a great one. I can feel it already in my bones. So with that being said, let's get out of here. My name is Tom, Nargai Tom. This is the Mando Vision Podcast. Buckethead Nation, you are the best. Thank you for always being here and supporting the podcast. And we have no intention of stopping through the rest of 2023. So thank you for being here. And we will be back next week. But remember, Bucketheads, this podcast can only end one way. This is the way.
We've been looking for this.
That's too bad.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.